As you get started, I'd like to take a moment to speak on the tragic events that unfolded yesterday in Charlotte. While attempting to serve a warrant, U.S. Marshals Task Force composed of several different law enforcement agencies were attacked with gunfire. Multiple officers were injured and sadly lost their lives yesterday. 4 who were killed were CMPD Officer Joshua Ayer, Sam Polichet, Alden Elliott. Alden Elliott and Sam both with the Department of Adult Corrections. There was also an additional Deputy U.S. Marshal that's not been identified yet. There are also others that are still hanging on to their lives at this time. Law enforcement officers do take a risk with what they do every day they go to work. They put themselves in harm's way to keep the rest of the community safe, and we cannot thank our law enforcement enough for all the sacrifices they make. I'd like to ask that everyone in this committee just keep those officers and their families in your thoughts and prayers as you go through today. I have no doubt that's where Senator Marcus is now, is back in Mecklenburg County with her constituents. Today, April 30th, 2024, I'd like to start by recognizing our Senate Sergeant at Arms, Michael Cavanis, Dwight Green in the back, Dean Gustafson, Mike Harris, Linda Matthews, and Chris Moore. We also have some pages with us. If you could stand and we call your name. We have Gage Jackson from Dunn, North Carolina, sponsored by Senator Jarvis. We have Jacob McHatton from Pine Level, North Carolina, sponsored by Senator Sawry. We have Sarah Enty from Mooresville, sponsored by Senator Berger. We have Avery Pickard from Burlington, sponsored by Senator Gailey. And we have Zoe Zhang from Chapel Hill, sponsored by Senator Meyer. Thank you for being with us. We hope that you learn a lot this week, and we hope you can teach your senators a lot this week as well. We have one bill to start off the judiciary for the short session, relatively, I would say, somewhat non-controversial bill. House Bill 10 requires sheriffs to cooperate with ICE. We have with us Representatives Hall and Representatives Jones to present the bill to committee. Chairman Hall, Chairman Jones, if you would like to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senators, good to see you all again. Most of you know about this bill. It's come to the Senate a couple of times, been through the House a couple of times, so I won't spend a long time talking through the history of it, but just the broad points are, right now in North Carolina, somewhere around 90 sheriffs in our state voluntarily cooperate with ICE detainers. And ICE detainers have been around since the 1950s. It's been a common tool that ICE has used for immigration enforcement purposes. We do have immigration laws in this country. ICE is largely tasked with enforcing those laws. And one of the ways they've done that, again, since the 50s is through the use of an immigration through a detainer. And if you look at the stats, according to ICE, somewhere around half of their enforcement is done through detainers and in local jails. And the reason that they like to do that in a local jail is because if the person is not in jail, it doesn't mean that the detainer just simply goes away. They then have to go out into the field in order to enforce that detainer request. And as the chairman mentioned a moment ago, the horrible tragedy that happened yesterday in Charlotte, what precipitated all of that was the officers serving a fugitive warrant. That had nothing to do with immigration in that case, but any law enforcement officer you talk to will tell you probably the most dangerous thing that they ever have to do is serve any kind of process, a warrant, whatever it may be. Because they're out in the field, they're going to somebody's home, they're going to out in public to try to enforce some process on an individual. And you never know what you're walking into as a law enforcement officer when you're going to serve, again, a warrant, or in this case, an ICE detainer. And the folks from ICE are law enforcement officers as well. They're federal law enforcement officers. And if they're allowed to do that within the confines of the jail, they're much safer as law enforcement officers. The individual who they're taking into custody is safer. The folks who are around them are safer because we know it's unlikely you're going to have a shootout or any sort of struggle inside of the jail. That's why ICE hones in on trying to deal with folks who are in jails. And in large part, and that's because much of ICE, much of their immigration enforcement is targeted to folks who are not only just here illegally, but also doing things they shouldn't be doing here illegally. So they've committed a crime in North Carolina or been charged with a crime. Neutral third-party magistrates found probable cause that a crime's been committed. Those are the folks that they're dealing with. And until about 2018, as best we can tell, every single sheriff in this state voluntarily cooperated with ICE, just like all law enforcement, state and federal, cooperate with one another. They work together as partners. And in the case we saw yesterday, that was a joint effort. You had state officers and federal officers there. Same thing happens with immigration enforcement. And so why do we need this bill? Well, as everyone knows, there's a small number of sheriffs, probably somewhere around 10 or so now, who don't honor ICE detainers. And in fact, in many cases, according to folks at ICE and others, some sheriffs, they simply don't even communicate with ICE at all. So ICE calls and says, do you have this person? That sheriff's office doesn't communicate with them at all. And what ends up happening is, the example is you get a person who is not just here illegally, but they've also been charged with a crime. And ICE has issued a detainer request for that individual. That individual, through one means or the other, they meet their state criminal charge pretrial conditions of release. And they're just simply allowed to walk out of the jail despite the federal government having issued an ICE detainer. Whereas those sheriffs very clearly under the law, if they want to, can honor that ICE detainer. They can hold that individual for up to 48 hours. And it's very important to understand an ICE detainer itself only allows for an individual to be held for up to 48 hours. So it's not some sort of order that just says you got to hold them until we get to it. It's up to 48 hours. And that's what this bill tracks. This bill just says that when, again, an individual who's in this country illegally has also been charged with a crime, and not just any crime, but a series of a set of very serious crimes, serious felonies, murder, rape, kidnapping, or a A1 misdemeanor, which is a serious misdemeanor, sexual battery, assault of a female, the more serious types of misdemeanors. In those cases, the sheriff, if they can't determine citizenship for that person, they've got to query ICE, and if ICE issues a detainer, the sheriff then has to take that individual back before the state magistrate who sets pretrial conditions of release. They're a judge. And that state magistrate then has to issue a state order to hold the person for up to 48 hours in order to honor that ICE detainer. And part of the reason that last part is in the bill is because, as we've gone through this process, we've heard from a number of folks who say, well, we're worried that we're going to get sued because we're holding somebody when their state law conditions of release have been met, and we're just simply honoring an ICE detainer. Now, again, 90-some sheriffs in the state are already doing that anyway, and so I don't think that argument fully carries weight. I think ICE detainers are legally effective. Certainly, the United States Supreme Court's not found that they were not. But in order to allay those fears, in this bill, we've given those sheriffs who have a concern about constitutional issues that they may believe are there, we give them a solution to that. And that is we give them a court order, which is what I've heard from some of those sheriffs over and over again is, give us a court order, give us a warrant, give us a judicial process. Well, you have that in this bill. And so, we've seen a number of times in various counties in the state where the results of not cooperating with ICE have been tragic. We've had folks who were arrested and ICE detainer was issued. They were let out of jail. ICE was not contacted. They were allowed to just leave. And then within a shorter period of time, they've committed another crime. And one of the most often cited examples, again, was in Mecklenburg, where an individual who'd been charged with some domestic violence-related offenses got out. The sheriff didn't honor ICE detainer. That individual went and committed domestic violence again against the same victim as before. And all of that could have been avoided if the sheriff had just honored the ICE detainer. So it is a common sense bill that I've been dealing with this issue now for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, and it still, to me, is amazing that we even have to have a bill like this. It seems to me to be common sense that law enforcement should cooperate with one another, and their first goal should be public safety. And so, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'm glad to stand for any questions, but members, I ask you to support the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any comments you would like to make, Representative Jones, Chairman Jones? Okay, at this time, I will take questions from members of the committee, if there are any questions. I forgot. Bud Newton, Senator Newton, I believe you have an amendment. Is that correct?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And thank you, Representative Hall, for being here. And I think this is an excellent bill. It's an issue that some other senators and I worked on this issue back when I was in office before, and I'm glad to see it get to the finish line. But time has given us an opportunity to reflect a little bit more about what may be needed, and so I'd like to send forth an amendment, and I'm happy to stand for any questions about it.
Send forward your amendment. I believe the amendment should be on everyone's desk in front of them. Senator Newton, if you could, the amendment is titled H10 ACE-101 version 4. Senator Newton moving to amend the bill. Would you like to explain your amendment?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the amendment moves the effective date from December 1 to July 1, 2024. Excuse me, December 1st, 2023 to July 1st, 2024. Amendment also removes the appropriation from the bill. That's an issue that can be dealt with in the short session budget. But probably most significant, the amendment adds a second section to the bill that allows any person, including a federal agency, to file a complaint with the North Carolina Attorney General alleging that the sheriff or a jail administrator has failed to comply with the provisions of this bill. If the Attorney General determines that there is sufficient evidence that the sheriff or jail administrator is not complying with the law, the AG, the Attorney General may file a petition for declaratory or injunctive relief, mandamus, or other appropriate relief in the county in which the jail is located or here in Wake County. That pretty much summarizes the amendment. It gives an enforcement mechanism opportunity for the Attorney General's office and a complaint mechanism to be brought from the general public, federal agencies, or other law enforcement.
Thank you, Senator Newton. Any questions about the amendment? And again, it should be version 5, not version 4. I apologize. And everyone should have that version 5 in front of them. Any questions or comments about the amendment? If not, have a motion for favorable as to the amendment from Senator Sawry. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 10 as amended is back before the committee. Any questions or comments from members of the committee? We do have some folks in the audience that have signed up to speak. Any questions or comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, I will move on to the audience at this time. And some of these signatures, I apologize, it was wrote with pencil, so some may be difficult to see. First is, or pronounced, Helen Galeas El Pueblo. And if you could step to the podium, ma'am. Each speaker is going to be given a minute and 30 seconds from each group. We do have another meeting to get to at 12 p.m.
Hi, I'm here on behalf of Sheriff Will Rowe with his statement. As Sheriff of Wake County, I want to make it clear that I oppose House Bill 10. This bill hinders the Sheriff's Office's ability to build relationships with the community and takes away authority from the Sheriff to set local law enforcement priorities. This bill will prohibit jails from releasing individuals on bail, even if they are eligible for release under North Carolina law, based on a request, approval, or other instruction from the federal government. I want to make our community safer, but HB 10 will make us less safe by preventing distrust in local law enforcement. No one should fear interacting with the Wake County Sheriff Office because of their federal immigration status. North Carolina General Status 16262 mandates that all sheriffs make a query and notify ICE. In certain circumstances, if we're unable to determine whether a person is a U.S. citizen or legal resident, as an elected official, I must be able to determine local state priorities. The Wake County Sheriff's Office enjoys a positive working relationship with local, state, and federal agencies. Additional laws are not necessary to further those partnerships and keeping our community safe. Along with my opposition, I am calling for comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level. I urge Congress to provide sufficient resources to secure our county's border effectively, efficiently, and in a humane manner. It is essential that our elected representatives work together to enact comprehensive legislation that addresses these issues effectively. As a sheriff, I am entrusted with the protection of our residents, and I believe it is imperative that that decision be taken.
Thank you, Ms. Glass. I believe Senator Tom McInnes is listening somewhere and looking for a potential auctioneer, so stay active. You did really good and super fast. Thank you. Next, we have Sejal Zoda from Just Futures Law.
Good morning. I've worked on these issues for some time, and I argued the Chavez case before the North Carolina Supreme Court, which dealt with sheriff's detention of immigrants. This bill requires jails to comply with ICE detainers for any person charged with any crime. There are constitutional issues here with ICE warrants and ICE detainers. First, federal courts have uniformly held that ICE detainers are not mandatory. They are simply requests. And an ICE administrative warrant is not a criminal warrant. It's not signed by a judge, and the Ninth Circuit recently held that this is a problem for probable cause. Moreover, ICE detainers are rife with error. NPR reports that over a 9-year period, ICE wrongly detained 1,500 U.S. citizens. Second, ICE warrants do not provide arrest authority to our sheriffs. Federal regulations make that clear, and the legislature seems to understand this because they've created a whole new process, but that process just causes more problems. It doesn't fix the issue. Now we have magistrates who are not trained in this area, and this authorizing detention, which conflicts with federal law, still doesn't provide probable cause. Lastly, this law exposes sheriffs to a significant risk of financial liability, and this bill can't insulate them from that. And I have a list of lawsuits here that I would like to send up, and settlements that I'd like to send up to the committee. Thank you.
If you could hand those to Sergeant at Arms, I have no problem with those being distributed to the committee. Next, we have from Rockingham County, the Sheriff Sam Page.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I think Mr. Hall, Destin, I think you said it as best you could say, Mr. Jones. You said what this bill does. I support it 100%. We've over 4 years working on this bill. It's about protecting America. It's about protecting our state. It's about protecting our citizens. And I can believe, as a sheriff in Rockingham County for 26 years, that when we remove criminal offenders from our community, we make our community safer. Now, we're talking about illegal aliens that are in communities that are committing criminal offenses. If we remove those persons from our communities, it makes us safer. I'll state 2 cases. Kate Steiner, subject was removed 5 times and returned into the United States. Kate Steiner in San Francisco, she was killed. Lakin Riley in Georgia just recently, subject should have been removed, should have been identified, interfaced with ICE, and removed in New York before the person even got to Georgia. These are preventable crimes. By working with ICE, by working with our federal authorities and our federal partners, we do make our community safer. And everyone here, we have the first responsibility of government is protecting our citizens and our communities. I want a safer state, I want safe communities, I want a safe nation. Thank you, and I appreciate you presenting this bill. I stand behind it 100%. I'm Sheriff Rockingham County. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Next, we have Gustavo Rodea from El Pueblo.
Hi, my name is Gustavo Rodea. I'm from Wilmington, North Carolina. I've been here 20 years. I'm a business owner for the last 20 years. I have seen the impact that these laws can have to the business community. This bill is bad for North Carolina economy. According to the American Immigration Council, there are more than 87,000 living in North Carolina, contribute 8.4 billion would be annually local and federal taxes. New business are the main driver growth in the United States. Immigrants start new business at higher rate than the U.S. population. More than 67,000 business in North Carolina with total business income of 1.5 billion with a B. Immigrant workers are critical to meet a North Carolina house shortage, as composed 70% of roofers, 85% drywall, and 35% of installers. North Carolina economy relies on immigrant farm workers. These workers are vital for North Carolina with a 1.3 billion would be agriculture, industry, and 52%. By taking harsh anti-immigrant stance, North Carolina drive out immigrants' negative impact over community. Business will be negatively impacted, could potentially lose workers, consumers due to the fear of HB 10. This has happened in other states, Florida, Georgia, Arizona. Immigrants left because they are scared of being arrested and simply driving and interacting with police officers. The state of North Carolina should be celebrating the contribution of the immigrant business community, not endorsing legislations to feel them unwelcome and unsafe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodea. Next, we have Mark, somebody who's a citizen. Is there Mark who signed up that I can't read the last name? You, Mark, to the podium, sir. Thank you.
My name is Mark Swallow. Here we go again. So last session, we were vilifying and victimizing children who were LGBT, trans, especially trans. For a party that's supposed to be family values, to replace family with government doesn't make any sense. But it's not really about making sense. It's about keeping power. So now this session, we're back to the tried and true approach of attacking the immigration community. But but you say it's because they committed a crime, but they haven't been convicted, tried or convicted of a crime. HB 10 is nothing more than vilifying and victimizing the immigrant community, which again makes no sense. Economic studies across the political spectrum show that immigrants create more jobs than they take, like the gentleman said. Jobs immigrants do take are essential to the basic functioning of our society. Farm work, construction work, landscaping, house cleaning, et cetera, et cetera. In 2016, immigrants contributed an estimated $2 trillion to US GDP. 2018, economists calculated over $450 billion to local, state, and federal taxes. Immigrants wielded more than $1.2 trillion in spending power to the U.S. And kind of alive from the Republican Party, unauthorized immigrants, for all the money they contributed, cannot collect many public services, cannot vote, cannot obtain Social Security. But again, it's not about making sense, is it? It's about keeping power. Stop this nonsense and work on real legislation that the people need. We need to ban assault weapons, provide for real gun control, that's the #1 killer of our children, and help families, working families, with full day care services. You were elected by the citizens of North Carolina to represent all the values of North Carolinians. HB 10 does not meet that need.
Thank you, sir. Next is Miriam Non from the NC Justice Center.
Good morning. My name is Mariam Khan. I'm the staff attorney with the Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project at the North Carolina Justice Center. I'm happy to be here today to denounce this bill. As it currently stands, it has a chilling effect on our policy and law and our budget with individual law enforcement agencies across the state. This will have serious consequences as far as constitutionality, and I have seen this bill in practice over my years, and it has not proven effective. So as an immigration practitioner, as a North Carolinian, and as an immigrant myself, I have serious doubts and concerns about this bill, and I strongly oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, we have Veronica Aguilar from El Pueblo.
Good morning. My name is Veronica Aguilar. I grew up in Harnett County, and I live right now in Raleigh and work with the Pueblo, a nonprofit based here.
HB 10 will not make North Carolina safer. Instead, this bill will interfere with decisions about local resources and priorities, expose sheriffs and counties to expensive lawsuits for constitutional violations, and weaken community trust in law enforcement. By forcing sheriffs to collaborate with ICE, it will make people in our community distrust law enforcement even more, and prefer not to report crimes to cooperate with police investigations for fear of deportation. It will make everyone less safe. HB 10 also raises serious legal questions because it will limit the constitutional rights of people detained in the state. Sheriffs and prison officials in the state would be exposed to lawsuits for constitutional violations by holding people beyond the legal time established by the Constitution. Those presumed innocent will be denied a meaningful opportunity to legally defend themselves, as they will be removed by ICE before they can prove their innocence in a court of law in our state. I ask you, is this the kind of justice and security you want for North Carolina?
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. Next we have Andresia Ramirez from NC Justice Center.
Good morning, my name is Andresia Ramirez, a resident of Wilson, North Carolina, and a U.S. citizen. I am speaking on behalf of the children of immigrant parents, specifically those who currently hold no legal status. I was 10 years old when I first learned what it meant to be undocumented. It was also when my mother and I created an emergency plan for what I should do if she was ever stopped for driving without a license while taking us to school and was deported. At the time, it was just my brother and I and her against the world, and it took many years until I was able to not fear the sight of a police officer. As a child, I lived thinking that one way or another, they could rip my mother away from me. While this may seem silly to many of you, this was my reality. And it is a reality of many to this day. It is bills like HB 10 that perpetuate this fear within our community and stops many from serving as witnesses or reporting crimes. I want to note that Wilson County Sheriff Calvin Woodard signed against the passing of this bill last year. I end by stating that the bill interferes with communities and sheriff's decisions about local resources and priorities, exposes sheriffs and counties to expensive lawsuits for constitutional violations, and further erodes community trust in law enforcement. Gracias.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. That is the last individual that has signed up. I'd like to take this one before turning to the committee. Just thank Representative Hall and Representative Johnson for bringing this bill forward. Coming from rural eastern North Carolina, I'm glad that this does not, this would not impact folks who are stopped for minor traffic offenses. This is not something that those folks will be facing deportation over. Without those good, hardworking folks in eastern North Carolina, the agriculture industry was shut down, the construction industry was shut down. That's not what this bill does. This deals with violent offenders who have been deported for violent acts. And I'm thankful that they came forward with this bill once again and hope we can get it across the finish line this time. I have Senator Muhammad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for staff on the bill.
Yes. That'd probably be Robert Ryan.
Mr. Ryan, question about the bill. Who currently determines the release of a criminal defendant? Is it a sheriff or a judicial officer, and what is that process?
Sure. After an arrest, the defendant is brought before a judicial officer and magistrate for initial appearance, and with certain exceptions, the magistrate can determine the pretrial release. For certain exceptions, the recent Pretrial Integrity Act will carve out serious offenses that only a judge could set pretrial release, and if a person was arrested for certain domestic violence offenses, it would be a judge instead of the magistrate.
So, just to follow up,
Senator Muhammad.
you said it would be a judge that make that determination, correct?
Yes, magistrate or a judge.
Follow up, Mr.
Follow up, Senator Muhammad.
Mr. Ryan, what happens under this bill if it were to become effective to that criminal defendant now that's been taken by ICE? What would happen to those pending criminal charges? What happens if this individual's been detained by ICE while they have pending criminal charges?
So under the text of the bill, once a person is arrested, they would go before a magistrate, and then if the sheriff runs the query and determines that an ICE detainer has been lodged, they would need to hold the individual for a period of time, up to 48 hours, and wait to see if ICE was going to take custody of that individual, rescind the detainer, or go ahead and if ICE did not take custody within 48 hours, it would the defendant would have to be released on the terms of the regular pretrial release under the state court's order.
Follow-up, Senator Monmouth.
Follow up. So, Mr. Ryan, if that individual is released while pending criminal charges, what happens to them, to those criminal charges?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
If that individual is released due to the ICE detainer to federal authorities, what happens to those criminal charges?
My understanding, the criminal charges will still be pending.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Question for the bill sponsor, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just ask you, based on what you just heard Mr. Ryan talk about, how does the removal of a criminal defendant because of an ICE detainer, how does that affect our local district attorney's ability and authority to prosecute criminal cases, especially when this individual now that's been put into ICE custody is a key witness or in fact a criminal defendant? How does a victim of crime get justice if that individual's essentially, with the help of the state of North Carolina, evaded criminal prosecution?
I appreciate the
Representative
question,
Hall.
Chairman. It's a point that I wish I'd made in the beginning, and that is, the answer is local DA's offices cooperate with ICE themselves. So what happens is when somebody is picked up on a detainer request, they communicate with the local DA's office, and I've talked to the folks at ICE about this, I've talked to some DAs about it. If it's a serious charge, for example, if it's first-degree murder, often ICE will hold the individual, bring them back to trial, or they'll let the individual stay there in the local jail. And you got to keep in mind, it's not literally every single person who's been charged with a crime who's also here illegally who has an ICE detainer lodged against them. They don't just lodge a detainer against any individual, period, because they're illegal and again been charged with a crime. So, we're talking about folks who ICE is really after for one reason or the other. Often it's because this is not the first offense. It's because, maybe they've been deported before. But the short answer is they cooperate with the DA's office. The DA's office cooperates back with ICE. It's not the situation that somebody is somehow charged with serious crime and ICE just takes the person and you never hear from them again. In many cases, ICE looks at it on a case by case and says, well, if the person is charged with first-degree murder, then perhaps they should stay there and have their charges dealt with, or perhaps they bring them back. If that person is convicted, obviously they would be in a state prison at that point. But it goes back to the larger point of this is what sheriffs should do as well. They should cooperate with ICE just like our DA's offices do across the state right now. And unfortunately, they're not doing that, and so there's a breakdown in the system and in the way that these criminal defendants are processed.
Thank you, Representative Hall.
Just a quick comment.
Yes.
Representative Hall, again, I appreciate you being here and advocating for your bill. Again, in my experience, having had represented criminal defendants as well, I've never actually seen ICE bring back a criminal defendant. Once an individual's been released, they're gone, and victims of crime don't often get justice. So my concern is that this bill does not guarantee any type of justice to victims of crime at the end of the day. And that's my bigger concern. Public safety as a whole, we're trying to preserve public safety, but my concern is that your bill essentially hinders public safety as a whole by not allowing individuals to seek justice, by not allowing prosecutors to fully prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. And there's no guarantee that that individual, now that has been taken to ICE custody and potentially deported, there's no guarantee that the individual won't ever come back. And if they come back, they could be in another jurisdiction continuously evading law enforcement. So I would just bring that to your attention and let any supporters of this bill keep those things in mind. Thank you.
Chairman, if I may, I just want to mention one other thing. The gentleman point's well taken, but I would also say, until 2018, every sheriff in the state was cooperating with ICE, and there wasn't a great outcry that somehow, victim after victim was not being able to see their day in court. Handling criminal cases, you also know what I've seen, what the chairman and others in here have seen. Sometimes you have a situation where the criminal defendant, if they're here illegally and they're a criminal defendant and they're let out on pretrial condition of release, because again, ICE doesn't lodge a detainer against every single person. Many times, that person is never heard from again. They go somewhere else, they leave the jurisdiction of the state, whether they leave the country or not. I have a constituent in my district, who, she was in Dare County, this was probably 10 years ago, and, she was with her brother, they were on vacation, they were hit by, an illegal alien who, was drunk at the time, and her brother was killed. And that, the defendant was let out of jail, and they've not heard from him since. And so, you know, I don't know that this is going to change a whole lot about the cooperation between DAs and the ICE offices. If you've got an idea for an amendment for how we can fix that, I'd be glad to hear that. But I think it's, you know, one of those things that is I don't know that this bill's going to create that problem if it already exists.
Thank you, Representative Hall. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, I'd like to ask for a motion. Have a motion from Senator Newton. Moves for favorable report as to House Bill 10 as amended, rolling to a new committee substitute with a referral to rules. All, is that your motion? All in favor? Nope. Yeah. Unfavorable to the original bill with the referral to rules. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned.